And now I have the pleasure to welcome Volker Dierschke. He's going to talk about seabird sensitivity for marine spatial planning. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm presenting on behalf of a DDA, which is something like BTO in Germany, but a bit smaller. But it's the group conducting the seabird monitoring in Germany, about which I will also tell you. This is the sea as we like it, as seabirds like it, and as many people still think it looks like, but in reality it's a bit different because this is a map of a German North Sea, so coastal waters and EEZ together, and with all the activities from a marine spatial plan. So there's a lot of activities going on, and fisheries are not even shown here. So offshore wind farms, aggregate extraction, pipelines, military practice, and so on. And of course, the pressures will increase because other activities are coming up, like CCS, energy islands, and even a space port is suggested for the Dogger Bank. Yeah, because of all these pressures, we were asked to produce sensitivity maps to show where sensitive areas are from the point of view of seabirds. These sensitivity maps shall inform the marine spatial planning, and they shall be done by combining the spatial bird data with the sensitivities of birds to all these activities. We seek to achieve a clear spread between sensitive and non-sensitive areas because we don't have measurements or values for absolute sensitivity, therefore we approach this problem with indices, and these should be easy to understand. So we want to avoid very complicated formula because they are different to sell to the public, to stakeholders, and so on. And also we want to rely on accepted methods, and therefore we build on this paper, which was published exactly 20 years ago, and which is cited many hundred times. Our approach involves 4 steps, which I will show you in the following minutes. At first, it needs to prepare the bird data in a useful way, and we have a nice offshore monitoring in Germany going on for many years now, and so the left panel shows you the coverage in each of the 4 seasons, so the survey effort, and the right map shows you all the observations of razorbill in this case in winter, and using models we have this kind of distribution maps for all seabird species for each of the 4 seasons, so spring, summer, autumn, and winter. In the second step, we need to define the species-specific sensitivities to each of the human activities, but I will show you it on the example of offshore wind farm and the effect of the visual disturbance effect, which leads to avoidance and displacement. So this index describing this sensitivity is built on 3 components. The first is the reaction to this activity. In this case, it's the avoidance behavior of the seabirds, which we observed or measured in the field. The second component describes the costs for the individual, meaning that, for instance, a gannet can, if it is displaced, it can forage anywhere else, but a common scoter, for instance, relies on shallow water with bivalves in the sediment. And the third component has several parameters describing the population status, like threat status, population size, and adult survival rate. So altogether it's not a very new approach, so it was, as I learned yesterday in the workshop, it's applied in slightly the same way in other countries as well. Each of the parameters is scored in 5 levels, with 5, or in the first component 4 being or expressing the highest sensitivity, and 0 or 1 are the lowest ones. If we put data, or if we use data and give the scores for each species to produce an index value, we get, in this case, for the avoidance of offshore wind farms, a ranking of sensitivity, and you see divers or loons are the most sensitive species, followed by common guillemot, and at the lower end you find some gull species. In the next step, we combine the first 2 steps, so the bird densities with species-specific sensitivities. The map is again for 1 species and 1 season, the guillemot in this case. And what we have done is to, for each square kilometer, so 1 by 1 kilometer grid cell, we choose the highest seasonal value of density. We logarithmize these densities and multiply them with the sensitivity of a respective species. And when we add up for each square kilometer all the values for all species, so 20 species in this case, then we get this so-called area sensitivity index, which expresses the sensitivity for each point on the map. And well, the next step is to show the map. That is the sensitivity map for all 20 seabird species for offshore wind farm avoidance. And of course, the more red you see, the more sensitive the area is. And we have 3 main areas which are highly sensitive. The first one are all the coastal waters, including Helgoland, because there are many species of seabirds and many individuals. So that adds up to high sensitivity. Another area is a bit further off the coast. It's a spring staging site of red-throated divers, which you have seen on the table as the most sensitive species. And of course, there are other species as well. And these 2 areas, the coastal waters and this diver staging area, they are protected, as shown by the green hatching. But there's a 3rd highly sensitive area in the north of the German EEZ, and that's not protected. And it's a molting site for common guillemots, and also the last stage of chick rearing is done there. So this site is not protected, and as you can see, I also depicted all the wind farms, the existing ones with dark gray surrounding, and the planned ones with shading. And you can see this highly sensitive area in the north, which is not protected, is planned to be a very big wind farm, which is altogether 120 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide. So, Eleni just showed us that guillemots are very sensitive, and they have a large effect radius of nearly 20 kilometers, so a large area will get lost for guillemots, we fear at least. We have 2 more sensitivity maps. The left panel shows you, again, offshore wind farms, but this time another effect, collision. Of course, there are other parameters which go into the sensitivity index formula, especially collision risk, which itself is derived from several parameters because it's difficult to measure. And the most sensitive species here are several gull species and the northern gannet and the great cormorant. On the right-hand side, you see a sensitivity map concerning disturbance from shipping. ships play also a role in all this offshore wind farm plannings because there are many service boats on the way back and forth to the wind farms. And here the sensitivity index has other parameters, escape distance and wing load, for instance. And the most sensitive species are the divers, the razorbill, and the common scoter. So altogether we have now 3 maps, and we are going to produce more of them for other activities like aggregate extraction and fishing methods. And later on we will combine this in a project sensitivity maps of seabirds with those of marine mammals, fish, bird migration, bat migration, aquatic habitats, and still the main purpose is to serve a forthcoming evaluation of a marine spatial plan or planning in Germany, which is going on into the in the next 2 years. And of course, it's useful to have it for the update of a marine spatial plan. And as a side effect, these maps can inform specific projects because they show the suitability of location, and we can align mitigation measures to the local conditions, but they can never replace an environmental impact assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can start with a question, which is the obvious one. Of course, this is very focused on the German waters. From your next steps, are you considering also contacting the nearby countries to assess where your seabirds are actually going? Because I'm sure they will be interlinked because shipping and so on, because marine spatial planning is actually quite global.
The application of this index is, of course, because we have some Germany-related parameters like red list status in Germany. So to have an overall map, we need parameters which are, valid across the area we look at. It was yesterday also a conclusion in the workshop that we had a workshop on sensitivity maps, and I apologize from there, but it was a conclusion that we should do this on an international level to have, especially, for instance, as you have seen, the German part of the Dogger Bank is a very small stretch of sea, and of course there are plannings in the Dutch, British, and Danish parts of the surrounding area, and it's very useful to have a overall approach. And as far as I know, there's an OSPAR group working on this, and I don't know whether they are producing sensitivity maps, but they are going for more international approaches.
Okay. Thank you. Volker? Anybody else? You. And now we have Lila Buckingham. Hey. And Lila is going to talk about quantifying non-breeding season impacts in wind farms. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, cool. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Lila Buckingham, and I'm a postdoc at the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research. And I'm going to talk to you today about a model that I've been developing. So, as we've heard, offshore wind farms can impact seabirds in a few different pathways. Firstly, through direct collision with a turbine. Secondly, through barrier effects, where seabirds are forced to reroute their journey around a wind farm footprint rather than going through. And finally, by displacement from potentially important foraging habitats. So collision is a lethal effect, which is slightly easier to quantify because birds are in 2 states, they're dead or alive. But barrier effects and displacement have energetic consequences that can have important impacts on future survival and breeding success. And what's particularly important to take into account, but quite difficult to model, is how these wind farms can create cumulative effects, which mean that these energetic impacts can really mount up to have really important consequences. So cumulative effects might be individuals interacting with multiple different wind farms, or repeated interactions with single wind farms. So we aimed to address this question, to model individual responses to offshore wind farms and quantify these cumulative effects. And the approach that we took to do that was by using an individual-based model. So individual-based models are a really useful tool for quantifying these cumulative impacts because you can, as we've heard already, you can track individuals over time and measure how they respond to differences in their environment and quantify that further impact on their energetics. So if we say here we've got 3 different scenarios where we can create worlds with differing levels of impact severity. So here I've made 3 with high, medium, and lower impact. And we can set these individuals up with like an energy budget or like their body mass, for example, some quantity of fitness that we then measure over time. So here each individual has a little backpack of energy, and we can track how this changes over time. So if you move on to day 10, the individuals might have changed in their body mass remaining, and then we can track these lethal effects of these repeated interactions with threats over time and see what happens to the animals in our study. And then what's really useful is that we can scale those individual level effects up to the population. So again, I've got these 3 different scenarios, slightly more individuals, and we can say how does the population as a whole respond across a whole longer period of time, so say 1 breeding season or non-breeding season. And we can assess how survival, for example, is then changed over time in these different scenarios that we build. So I'm going to introduce a model that I've been developing that assesses this question. It's got 3 main parts. Firstly, movement, then offshore wind farm interaction, and finally, an energetic model. And then I'm going to just show you a case study of displacement effects of offshore wind farms on common guillemots breeding at the Isle of May. So slightly differently to how we've heard already, this model had a much more population level view. So it was parameterized using tracking data. And the tracking data that went in were from the CTRAC dataset, as Caitlin presented earlier. So we use similar populations and similar methods of using these geolocators that we've deployed to estimate activity budgets and population density for each day of the non-breeding season, which was the focus for this study. So just to give you an example, as Caitlin very helpfully presented earlier, this is an example map from the Isle of May of how these population density maps change. This is just going through July. Okay, so then we initialized our model. We gave each of our simulated individuals a daily activity budget, so time spent in each of these different behaviors. And we used these traveling behaviors, so-called, so for guillemots, time spent swimming on the water surface or flying, to inform how far each individual could move for each day of the non-breeding season. And then we used the time in all of the behaviors to estimate their daily energy expenditure, as Caitlin did earlier. Thank you, Caitlin. So then we had to say, when does the non-breeding season start and end? And we decided that we could reasonably well monitor this from the day that they laid their egg and the day that they fledged their chick, or the other way around. So we demarked that as the start and end of the non-breeding season. And we also wanted to track their mass over time as an indicator for that energy that I talked about earlier. So we simulated each individual to have a mass at the start and the end of the non-breeding season. And then because we also wanted to simulate mortality, we had to decide when an individual would die. So using data from birds that had starved during the winter, we calculated the kind of proportion of their breeding season mass that they had starved at, like assuming that they had bred at certain populations where we had those breeding season mass data. And we estimated that death generally occurred at around 0.76 or 76% of that breeding season mass. So we said if our individuals hit that threshold, they die. Okay, and then as I said earlier, we had 3 submodels in the model. So behavior movement, wind farm interaction, and energetic impact. And I'll just go through each of those now. So firstly, movement. So this is one of Pear's maps that I showed earlier, where the colour indicates the number of birds in each grid cell. So if we say that this white dot in the centre of this square is our starting location, we then want to simulate where it goes to on the next day. So basically drew a big circle around this using the time spent in each of those travelling behaviours and how fast they could have travelled while in those behaviours to say how far could I possibly have got today if I went in one straight direction. Then we basically cropped that raster to say, right, this is where I could go, so what's the probability of me arriving in each of these grid cells? So we basically converted those densities to a probability of being reallocated into each location. And then we said, right, that's where you're off to on the next day. So yeah, in this example, it's likely that the bird would have moved to the bottom right of that area. Okay, and then similar to Eleni, we parameterized our model using wind farms that are currently developed and are likely to be by 2030, which is the year that most governments have kind of published their plans for development and isn't too far away, so they might be realistic, hopefully. So that's just shown here. And then we use the displacement probability from Verena Peszko's work. So I'll just give you an example of that, although you've seen it briefly already. But how that looks visually is quite massive. So yeah, we basically used each buffer area from Verena Peszko's work to say, and the probability of displacement occurring in each of those areas to say, what's the likelihood of displacement if my individual is simulated into this location. And this is just autumn, which was kind of the worst case scenario that Verena found, but it looks quite dramatic, so I'll use that one. Yeah, so then offshore wind farm interaction. So we have our new location for today. What happens if we have been allocated into a wind farm area? Well, we extract that probability of displacement based on the time of year and how close we are to that wind farm footprint. Say in this example, we are displaced. Basically, assume that we were never there and reallocate the bird to somewhere else in that circle, again using the probability within that area. And then we gave the individual that was displaced an energetic cost of that displacement, which takes us on to submodel 3, energetics. So as we've heard, it's really difficult to know exactly what happens when an individual is displaced from an offshore wind farm. So I tried a few different things, but here I'm just going to talk to you about one example, which is where I have reduced the foraging success of individuals upon displacement. So just to give you an example, I ran 3 scenarios. 1, a baseline where there were no wind farms and no displacement. 2, a lower impact scenario where I reduced the foraging success by 0.75, so 75% of the baseline on every day that there was displacement for that individual. And then a higher impact scenario when I halved the foraging success. And then I modelled mass for each day of the non-breeding season, which was very briefly mass today, energy taken in, and energy put out, where the energy in part of the model was affected by that foraging success change. And then on each day, measured whether the individuals were dead or alive. And then, so to go on to the outputs for the model, we ran it for a full year, and then modelled how mortality rate and end-of-season mass changed in each of these scenarios. So I'll give you a brief, some preliminary results from a case study that we've been working on, which is of guillemots breeding on the Isle of May, which you should know where it is now, but there it is again. So these are some example simulations. I think they're pretty good. I'm quite happy with how this part of the model is working, especially given that it's geolocated data that are going in, which have a very high error. They're not perfect. Sometimes the birds don't quite make it home, as is the case on the right hand, so we're still working on that. But it kind of does look pretty similar to how we would expect, given the data that's going in. This figure shows the proportion of overlap of individuals that we simulated throughout the non-breeding season. So you can see that there's really high levels of overlap early in the non-breeding season in July, and then that kind of tails off throughout the year, but still reasonably high, between like 10 to 15% of individuals. And then using those displacement probabilities, that converts into a slightly lower rate of displacement for each day, which is shown in blue, but again, still quite high during July. And then this is what we converted into mass. So this figure shows our simulated mass in the baseline scenario. And so each individual is in light blue, and then the mean of all of the simulated individuals is in white. So this was the baseline where we wanted to basically model a healthy guillemot if there was no impact. So we wanted them all to survive, which is good because they did. And that orange line is the death threshold at the bottom. And then for each of our impact scenarios, we had a lower impact and a higher impact scenario, and you can see that the survival is quite different between those. So just to conclude, there was quite a high overlap with the wind farms in this case study, and this may lead to potentially significant impacts, but we really do need to figure out the energetic impacts of displacement in order to make these models more realistic. Thank you. Thanks.
Right, we have time for questions.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, do you have data that show how often they go away from the sites where there are wind farms to parameterize your avoidance parameter?
Yeah, so we used Verena Peshko's work where I think they did basically at-sea survey, surveys, at-sea survey data, to like calculate what the difference between pre-construction and post-construction was in terms of guillemot density. That took place in the southern North Sea, and we have applied it to the whole of the North Sea. So it may not be, well, it won't be 100% accurate, but it's the best that there is at the moment, and it's pretty good. So, yeah.
Thank you. I just didn't know about this paper. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe a question for all the presenters for the last session. Did you also consider positive effects? Because especially when huge percentages of the North Sea is built with wind farms, there will be no fishery going on. Nowadays, the last few years, there are more and more reports showing that habituation is going on in sandwich terns and guillemots. So maybe they will find very quiet areas within the next 10 years where no fisheries is going on, maybe more food. Did you consider that as well?
Not yet, but that is something that we will be doing in the future. So our plan is to include lots of different stressors in this model, including fisheries. So we want to simulate how fishery actual distributions will change after these wind farms are developed, which basically will mean that there's less fishing happening within those boundaries, and simulate what might happen under that scenario. But I'm not aware of a huge amount of studies of habituation of guillemots in wind farms, so it'd be good to hear more about that.
Winters we have had some days with lots of guillemots in our wind parks, and so it looks like habituation. We have that's no proof, of course. We have now several years with sandwich terns during spring, using wind farms even for fishing and for so there are things changing, and of course we have a lot of birds like gulls that are attracted to wind farms anyway. So
yeah, of course. Well, the modelling framework is meant to be flexible, so as more data come in, we can change different factors, parameters around it. Obviously, we haven't modelled sandwich terns, but that would be something we would consider more for that species. But yeah, I think this is an area where we're getting more and more research all the time, so that's why we've set the model up so that it can be responsive to more information as it comes in.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you. And now we have Anna Almeida, that's going to talk about compensation of potential impacts of offshore wind farms. Here she is.
It's an Almeida and the other one.
And Fraser Carter too. Is he coming too? Fraser?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Both. Way. Thank you, Anna and Fraser. Sim.
Acho que aqui está bom, que é para não ficar muito em cima.
Pois, isto anunciou atrás.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are still awake at this time of the day. My name is Ana Almeida, and I work for SPEA, which is the BirdLife partner in Portugal. And I will be giving a shared presentation with Fraser Carter. In the middle, we will just swap positions. So, I know that we are in a panel about offshore wind, and this presentation is about offshore wind compensation, but I will start with a first context about a big threat to seabirds, which is bycatch, and which is my main area of work. So as you know, bycatch is one of the major threats for seabirds at a global scale, at both number of species affected and number of individuals. It is by definition the capture of non-target species in fisheries, and it poses a global problem. Here is just a few examples of birds bycaught in Portuguese fisheries. So giving a national context to the subject, our Portuguese coast is very important for seabirds because it is crossed by the East Atlantic Flyway. It is a very rich coast, and it has a very vibrant sector of fisheries, which is mainly composed of small-scale fisheries and vessels that have polyvalent gears, which means that they can operate different fishing gears during the year. It is also a very traditional activity, so there is a lot of local fishing communities depending on this sector. So at SPEA, we started working and being concerned with bycatch back in 2008. And in the beginning, we wanted to understand the scale of the problem, which species were most affected, which were the most problematic fishing gears, and also other bits of information such as factors impacting bycatch, times of the fishing operation where the risk was higher, and all these questions that we had in our minds. Between 2008 and nowadays, we worked under different projects, mainly with European funding. We started with a general characterization of the problem along our entire mainland Portugal coast. And then afterwards we focused on our main, the most important SPAs for seabirds. Along all these years and all these projects, we were able to collect a big data set. So we used a combined methodology, including questionnaires to fishermen in fishing harbors, where we asked not only about seabird bycatch, but also about fishing effort and other information. And we have a total of almost 2,000 questionnaires. And we also have a program of fisheries observers on board that go on the fishing vessels and follow the entire fishing trip, collecting information such as technical details of the fishing operation, and not only bycatch, but the interactions between seabirds and the fisheries, like if they are feeding, if they are just passing by, if they are taking advantage of discards, and things like that. And so our current database has more than 1,000 fishing trips with an observer on board, which means a lot of hours at sea and some hours being sick. More recently, we started with another methodology, which is called self-logbooks, which means that it's a shorter amount of information that it's filled in by the fisherman itself. With all this information collected along the last years, we were able to publish some of the results, and this is just a very, very small summary of the the most problematic fishing gears and the species more affected by those fishing gears. So when we are looking about gillnets, which includes gillnets and tremal nets, the most impacted species is northern gannet, Balearic shearwater, common scooter, and alcids. And then for the Mersal longline, northern gannet, Cory shearwater, and gulls, which include both species. yellow-legged gull and black-headed gull. And lastly, Persine, which affects mainly gulls and Balearic shearwater. So there are other fishing gears like traps that do not pose any risk for seabirds, and trolling that seems to be not a very problematic fishing gear in Portugal for seabirds. So after collecting all these years of information and lots of data that it's not being totally explored as we wished, we started working with fishermen, closely trying to develop practical solutions to reduce the problem of bycatch. We trial different mitigation measures that could be devices that are deployed in the vessels or ways of operating the fishing gear to reduce the probability of occurring bycatch. And from all the ones that we trial, like things that were trialed in other regions of the globe, the one that showed most promising was this scary bird device, which is a replica of bird of prey that it's attached to the vessel, and that proved that reduced significantly the number of birds interacting with the fishing gear. It was significantly positive effect for different groups of species. Also the effect was most strong in the band of 20 meters around the fishing vessel. So this scary bird is a simple and easy to implement deterrent device. Fishermen like it because it's cheap, it's easy to operate, doesn't have a lot of maintenance. So we believe that this has the potential to be further tested as a bycatch mitigation measure in bottom gill nets, which is the gear where we tested with good results, but also other gears with other gears, whenever interactions with birds occur mainly close to the surface, which is the reality for this fishing gear in Portugal. So now I will pass the word to Fraser.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, I'm Fraser Carter. I'm a technical director at NIRAS. NIRAS are international consultants. We focus on all things bird and wind farm related, assessment, research, but also compensation. And that's the kind of link that ties in bycatch with then offshore wind farms. So gannets, as we've heard today, are impacted by a number of different things, bycatch being one of them, but they're also impacted by offshore wind farms. Collision is one impact, but also displacement-related impacts as well. And when those impacts are assessed via the habitat regulation appraisal, the HRA process that's commonplace across Europe and elsewhere for large-scale infrastructure projects, they are ascertained against relevant population scales for those different species. Now, those population scales, for the purposes of compensation, are often tied to SPAs, so special protection areas. And when multiple offshore wind farms might be having an additive effect across a species range, across a population from a particular SPA, there could be an in-combination level impact. And when that in-combination level impact reaches a threshold, and it might have an adverse effect on that protected site, there's a potential that that offshore wind farm might need to go down the derogations process. What are the derogations? Well, it's a step-by-step process, very complex, that's part of the HRA. But actually the bit that we're really interested in is the compensation measures element. Now, compensation measures are the kind of final step that you'd really like to go down. You ideally want to be mitigating your impacts as much as possible at the site to reduce your impact. So this could be increasing the hub height, so you're having fewer birds flying at collision risk height, or you could be doing things associated with hotspot analysis of where those turbines are located. The derogations process allows projects to still go ahead even when they do have an adverse effect, as long as they jump through a few hoops. And one of the key hoops associated with compensation measures are associated with ensuring the overall coherence of the SPA network. So in Europe, the Natura 2000, and in the UK, the transposed UK National Site Network is protected, and that those measures can be secured. This brings me on to this example project. So this is the Ossian offshore wind farm. It's a joint venture project between SSE, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, and Marubeni. It's a big project, 3.6 gigawatts. It's also floating, which is pretty unbelievable. It's 84 kilometres off the northeast coast of Scotland, and it's got a potential to produce power for around 6 million homes. So it's a really important project. It's also the first ScotWind application that has a full derogation case supporting the application stage. So the compensation measures are fully detailed within that application. The ScotWind round are the blue aspects here, so it's a joined up approach. And it's that in combination of those different blue projects, 2 particular SPAs, that have resulted in the project proposing this in combination issue. So what's that got to do with Scotland, though? Well, many of the gannets that Anna's mentioned may be of Scottish heritage or might be on their summer holidays during the migration. You can see I had a bit of fun on Copilot asking. You can imagine the prompt here. So the fact that some of these these gannets that are being by-caught in Portugal at quite a tremendous scale from some of the research that Anna and her team have found, potentially gives us an ability to offset the impacts associated with offshore wind farms via this compensation approach. Now, both the SPAs that we're talking about in Scotland and throughout UK, right down to the important bycatch hotspot areas that Anna discussed, are part of that important flyway. So it's likely that there are strong linkages here between Scottish SPA birds, but also the bycatch hotspots when they're away from the breeding territories as well. And this is what led NIRAS to work with Anna over the last couple of years to develop a very detailed compensation plan for bycatch. Compensation plan is basically a bit of a game plan, a bit of a recipe of how you will go about securing, implementing, monitoring, securing everything associated with how we will do this. And this one is focused on implementing the measures in Portugal for the purposes of the Ossian offshore wind farm. Now, there's loads of factors that we're working on at the moment. The application's just gone in. It won't be decided until mid-next year. So it gives us a bit of time to do a bit of planning, and that's part of the reason I'm here, not just for a bit of a holiday and attend the conference as well. But NIRAS supporting Ossian as the project and hopefully continuing to collaborate with Anna and the team at SPEA are focusing on these kind of key bullet points. And if you've got any questions, please come and speak to us afterwards. So we want to continue gathering the evidence of bycatch in different locations and at different scales and what time of year this is happening. Is it relevant to the birds that we're interested in? We'll answer that by doing more in-depth connectivity studies, so understanding, potentially via stable isotope analysis, where these bycaught birds have originated from or spend their molt periods at. Developing bycatch reduction techniques, so as Anna said, a really key location was, or factor was the scary bird, building on that. And then ideally implementing this as compensation and having the reduction to offset the impacts. And then, of course, monitoring and adapting. Now, I know you're going to flag that red bit in 1 second. This is the final slide. And it's really to pose a question back. So as the increase in offshore wind is going to happen at a global scale, so outside of what we're just talking about with northern gannets, it's going to be going like a rocket ship throughout Europe, and it already is in the UK. But does this massive increase in renewable energy actually present us with a really good potential here to fast-track research and provide funding that's vital to implementing some of these key conservation actions that could be seen as the broad umbrella approach of compensation? So something that we strongly feel is that this is a real win-win. So it's a win-win for seabirds, reducing the significant impact of bycatch, but it's also a huge win in potentially unlocking not just Ossian, but significant gigawatt potential with offshore wind farms. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Fraser. I hope so. That was the answer. Questions for Anna and Fraser? Oh, there's one. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. I was wondering, this compensation plan, is it on your own initiative from the developer, or is this also taken up by the regulators?
So yeah, very good question. So it's the compensation plan is led by the developer and me as the consultant supporting, so NIRAS supporting, and then working in collaboration with Anna and the team over the last couple of years. It currently then goes it's submitted, it goes in as an application, and it's currently with Scottish ministers to decide whether or not they support the project and ultimately the compensation that supports it. It's going through an extensive consultation period at the moment, so gathering views from relevant stakeholders or all stakeholders, part of that process. So it's not accepted yet. Bycatch has been accepted as compensation in the UK, so Hornsey 4 was the first project to have that, and other projects have come after that. But this is looking at it on a much larger scale, and obviously not in the UK. But that's precedent has been set for some of those elements as well.
What is your, sorry, would you mind if people are back? Just takes 1 second. Thank you.
What is your impression about the outcome of this consultation stage? Because we've tried this in the Netherlands a couple of times already, and no regulator wants to, well, express me, apologies for the Dutch expression, but wants to burn his fingers on on this kind of offsetting. So
On compensation?
I'm really interested to see whether UK is approving this.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of cases now within the UK, particularly English projects, of successful derogation cases. So Hornsey 3 was the first for Kittiwake, and then there's been a plethora of others. So there's lots of Kittiwake hotels at the moment around the UK, but there's other species are being added to the roster requiring compensation. So this is one of the processes that's going through for Scotland. Greenvolt is a Scottish project via the Intog round that's received consent relatively recently, and hopefully it will be positive news for Ossian too. So at the moment, it's a positive trend of if as long as the compensation case is tight and good and the evidence is there, hopefully positive, yeah.